Good evening, everyone. The 21st century marks what we call the digital age of social media. Today, about 74% of Americans under 30 report that they interact and engage daily on social platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. Entire generations have now grown up constantly connected online. But with this rise in social media, we've also seen a rise in side effects, especially for young people. Issues like anxiety, fear of missing out, which is often called FOMO, and low self-esteem are all more common than ever. At the heart of these problems is something called social comparison. Social comparisons means that people constantly judge their own lives against what they see others post online. But what we see online is not real life. It's carefully curated, highlight reels with filters, edits, and selective sharing. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok, which focus so heavily on photos, videos, and likes, make it even easier for people to compare themselves to unrealistic standards. This can push users toward what we see call upward social comparison, comparing themselves to those they think are better off, richer, prettier, or more successful. However, it's not all bad news. Social media does offer spaces for connection and self-expression too. People use it to keep in touch with friends, find communities, or share parts of their identity. So we're left with important questions. How exactly does social comparison work in these digital spaces? What are the psychological costs for people who compare too much? And when does it shift from harmless scrolling to something that really harms well-being? To help answer these questions, our literature review pulls together recent research. It covers what social comparison is, the main theories behind it, and how it relates to other concepts like passive scrolling and FOMO. It also looks at how people shape their identities and interpret what they see online. Taken together, this research shows us not only the psychological processes happening behind the screen, but also highlights the need for more thoughtful, context-aware approaches to protecting mental health in our digital world.
One of the key sources I looked at was a 2024 study by Arrigo, Berkovitz, Lapitan, and Goulart, which focuses on the idea of social comparison, or SC. They define SC as a process of evaluating yourself in relation to others, whether it's about ability, status, or performance. This process is actually very individualized and depends a lot on context. The authors explain that social comparison can have negative and positive effects. On the one hand, it can lead to anxiety or low self-esteem, especially in young people, but on the other hand, it can also help people feel connected and understood when they share similar experiences. So it's not as simple as saying social comparison is either good or bad. One of the major points is that we shouldn't jump to conclusions about SC being harmful in every case, especially when it comes to mental health. They argue that making broad claims oversimplifies what's really a complex issue. The study also points out a big challenge in this research. Most studies rely on self-reported data, which can be unreliable. People may not remember things accurately or even give answers they think are socially acceptable. Because of these limitations, the authors call for more detailed context-aware research that takes into account individual differences and lived experiences. Overall, this study reminds us that social comparison isn't just a digital era buzzword. It's a deeply personal and nuanced process that deserves more thoughtful research and attention, especially in the mental health field.
Hello, today I wanted to share a study published on Frontiers that was published in 2023. The study examined how subjective well-being, which is how satisfied we feel with our lives, is connected to social media addiction, specifically through the roles of social comparison and FOMO, which is the fear of missing out. The researchers surveyed 296 adults and tested how two forms of social comparison of ability, which is SKA, and comparison of opinion, SKO, influence people's emotions and behaviors on social media. Social comparison of ability is when we compare things like success, appearance, or lifestyle to others, while our social comparison of opinion involves comparing our beliefs or opinions to those of others online. The study found that people with lower well-being were more likely to engage in ability-based comparisons. This suggests when people don't feel great about their lives, they are more likely to focus on others who seem more successful or better off. However, opinion comparison didn't show a significant relationship with well-being. Both types of comparisons, though, were linked to higher FOMO. So regardless of what you're out And in turn, FOMO was a strong predictor of social networking addiction. In short, the study showed a clear cycle. Lower well-being leads to more social comparison, which leads to higher FOMO, which results in greater social media addiction. It offers insights into why social media use, especially when driven by comparison, can leave us feeling worse instead of better.
More researchers are using qualitative methods within a post positivist framework to explore how social media affects mental health. Post positivism recognizes that knowledge is shaped by context and human experience. It allows subjectivity while still looking for patterns and broader insights. For example, a study by Morton and Greenfield from 2022 interviewed university students about Instagram. Students said it helped with connection and self expression, but it also caused anxiety, comparison, and lower self esteem. This shows how social media can have both positive and negative effects depending on the individual. Another study by Urakami and their associates from 2022 used focus groups to study reactions to misinformation. Participants described feeling confused, frustrated, and emotionally drained. Many felt overwhelmed trying to sort truth from falsehood. This revealed a real emotional toll and the need for tools to support both information and emotional processing. So, our key takeaways here are qualitative post positivist research captures complex real world experiences. It doesn't aim for universal truths, but it can reveal meaningful patterns in how people experience digital life.
Now we ask the question how social media can have a major impact on mental health, especially through the lens of social comparison theory. Social comparison is when people judge themselves, comparing their abilities, appearance, or lifestyle to others. When people don't have clear feedback about themselves, they often look to others online to form self-evaluations. This can lead to overthinking and insecurity, especially on platforms where people only show their best moments. This the article I'm discussing in a source, research by Jeffrey Hancock, explains two types of social comparison, upward and downward. Upward comparison happens when someone compares themselves to someone they see as better, like a popular influencer, a successful peer, or even a parent. While this can motivate self-improvement, it often leads to negative feelings like envy, anxiety, or depression. The article says people are more likely to post positive rather than negative content on social media and manipulate their content following societal ideals, which makes these upward comparisons even more unrealistic. On the other hand, downward comparison is when someone compares themselves to someone they see as worse off. This can boost self-esteem temporarily, but it doesn't necessarily lead to real growth. The article also introduces two mental responses to comparison, assimilation and contrast. Assimilation happens when someone feels similar to the person they're comparing themselves to, which can inspire motivation. Contrast is when someone feels very different, which might protect their self-esteem, but also create more emotional distance and negative feelings. Finally, the selective accessibility model explains that people quickly judge how similar or different they are to others by recalling personal knowledge. If they find similarities, they're more likely to assimilate. If they find differences, they contrast. Overall, social media creates a constant environment for comparison, and this can deeply affect mental health, especially when people are comparing themselves to idealized versions of others. Understanding how and why we compare can help us become more aware of the emotional impact and maybe even break the cycle of negative self-evaluation.
Hey everyone, I'd like to talk about social comparison and how it plays on social media. This concept goes back to Fishner's social comparison theory, which explains how we evaluate ourselves by comparing our abilities and opinions to others on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. This often show up as upward social comparison, comparing ourselves to people who simply have better life, look better, or more are successful than us. But here's the problem: what we see on social media is carefully capture. People tend to post only the highlights, the win, the vacation. The filtered self is not the everyday struggle. According to the Vogel and colleagues 2014, this create a distorted reality that can have a real consequences. Studies show that frequent upward comparison are linked to the higher level of envy, low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, and stress. Young people, especially teen and those in early adulthood, are particularly at risk. They are forming their identities while being constantly exposed to unrealistic standards. While comparison can sometimes motivate self-improvement, the constant exposure to idealized content make it more harmful than helpful. This is why digital literacy is more important. We need to become more mindful of how we engage with social media, remembering that what we see is often just the surface, and protect our mental health by being aware of the effect these comparisons can have